What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and today we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from Season of Discovery to talk about the hero talents and the hero talent system being added in the War Within. But before we get to that real quick, just a note from last week. I'm obviously going back to this much more unscripted format of how I put this show together, which a lot of you seem to really enjoy. In fact, overwhelmingly positive in favor of the more unscripted approach to how I create the show. So we're going to stick with that. I am going to try to make myself a little bit better notes because I did kind of screw up a couple of small details in last week's episode. There's corrections in the comments on all of that. Nothing too big to worry about. But we're going to try and stick with the more unscripted format and just see how it goes. Okay, so let's talk about hero talents. We'll start with what we know so far about this system and how it's going to work. We know that this is an extra talent tree that's on top of your class and spec trees. This is a completely different aside thing that's on top of your already existing choices. We also know that they're adding a total of 39 hero talent trees in the War Within, which does happen to be the exact same number as there are specializations in the game. But it's not just a simple addition onto each spec's tree. You actually get to choose between two hero talent trees depending on your specialization. Every spec has access to two different trees, and every tree is available to two different specs. Now, this gets a little bit complicated to try to explain just using words, so I'm going to go ahead and put up the graphic that Blizzard released that shows how this works for the warrior hero talent trees. So you can see there's Protection, Fury, and Arms in our three corners here. Protection has access to Mountain Thane and Colossus. Fury has access to Mountain Thane and Slayer, and Arms has access to Colossus and Fury. So each spec does have two choices available to them, but Protection can never be a Slayer, Fury can never be a Colossus, and Arms can never be a Mountain Thane. Now there's 11 points in total in each of these trees. The first point, which you get for free just for selecting your hero talent tree, is what they call a keystone talent. This one kind of sets up the theme of the tree and sets up some of the basic mechanics for how that tree is going to function. The final point at the bottom of the tree is what they're calling a capstone talent. And this one usually kind of doubles down on what the overall theme of the tree is and amplifies or otherwise increases the effectiveness of whatever your keystone talent was. Now, sandwiched between that keystone and capstone talent are another 9 nodes. It's important to understand about this tree. One of the, in fact, core features of this tree is that you're going to get enough talent points to unlock all of these. By the time you've leveled to 80, you will have 10 talent points. You will have unlocked all 11 points in this tree in total. You're not choosing which ones you're not taking. You're literally just, as you're leveling, choosing which nodes you're unlocking first. Then there are inside the trees themselves, usually 3 or 4 choice nodes. So there will still be some choices to make, but you are looking at a node you've already unlocked and choosing between 2 options for that node, not whether or not you unlock the node at all in the first place. And for the most part, the vast majority of these nodes, at least from what we've seen so far, are all passives. They might be changing an existing ability. For example, the Sand Lane Keystone talent for Death Knights has a proc that can turn either Heart Strike or Scourge Strike into a new ability called Vampiric Strike, but that is converting an existing ability. It's not something new you need to drag onto your bar, with one exception, which we'll get to in a little bit. But in summary, this system is basically choosing what is the total tree that you want to have and what are the specific choices that that tree allows for inside those choice nodes. You're not branching out into like, what is my specific build? Where am I putting these points or anything like that? It's literally just, this is the package, make these couple of predetermined choices, and that's about it. And the reason they're going that direction actually ties in pretty directly with a lot of the philosophy that they've shared about what they're doing with hero talents. They put out a large blog post a couple of weeks ago now that went into some pretty in-depth analysis of their philosophy and their goals behind the system. And one of the big takeaways from that blog post, at least for me, was the phrase, what you are, but more. They're trying to make something that sort of doubles down on some existing aspect of your class fantasy, not something that's creating a whole entire new play style for you with these hero talents. The general concept seems to be leaning into and enhancing some aspect of your class that already exists. They even go into some great detail in this blog post talking about how they recognize that players have a lot of affiliation for a certain types of playstyles, or they have a lot of thoughts and feelings about how their character exists, and they don't want to tread on that too much. They want your majority of your choices to still take place inside your class and spec trees, and have this just be some added flavor or sprinkles on top of it. And there's one quote in that section of this article that I want to bring up because it's going to be relevant in a minute as we start going through some of their examples. That quote was, "We're trying not to add things like complex maintenance buffs that increase the cognitive load for everyone playing a class." Like I said, we're going to come back to that. One other interesting thing about their philosophy here and some of the examples they've given is that some of these do require specific talent choices. There are some of these trees that they've showed off so far that if you don't have this talent or that talent selected, you're really not getting anything out of this tree. Again, we'll talk about that some more once we start going through some of these actual examples, but I thought it was interesting just to point out as a philosophy. These aren't necessarily meant to be catch all, do whatever you want elsewhere, and then this hero talent is just a layer on top of that. There are cases where it does expand on choices you've made elsewhere in your build. Now, there's one other quote from this article that I want to bring up before we start going through the examples. Blizzard states in this article, "Our goal is for both options to feel similarly effective in raid dungeons, Mythic Plus, and PvP." Blizzard, honey, I love you. You know I love you. You've been saying this for decades, and it has never once turned out to actually be true. At least not to the satisfaction of anyone who's going to read an article like this. Sure, on a basic level, it's probably going to be the case that if you're not super worried about your overall performance, you're not trying to squeeze out every last bit of your character that you can, you're not really trying to push too hard on content, it will probably work out to be the case that, yeah, you can kind of pick whatever and you'll do okay. But that audience is not the same as the ones that are going to read a blog post with deep philosophical insights about a feature for an expansion that they're not going to play for another 8 to 10 months. Is it a good goal to have? Absolutely. Is it a good thing to shoot towards? Absolutely. Is it a good thing to tell that audience? Probably not. Now, that said, I do think this system has some advantages towards it that can get it closer than anything else in the past, namely the fact that the choices are very limited and they're very structured in such a way where there is very little like unexpected options that players can come up with. There's just not a lot of variance in what players can actually do with this system. And the fact that most of the benefits are passives does mean that there's a lot more ways to include tuning knobs so that they can actually do some adjustment on the fly. That said, just because it's passive and just because you know what it's going to be doesn't mean it's going to be easy to tune, especially if you're still trying to make these trees feel different from each other in other ways. Now, I will happily eat everything I just said. I will eat all of those words with a side of ketchup if they manage to pull it off. I'm skeptical, but we'll see what they can do. And we'll start by looking at what they've shown us so far, what the trees that they've actually revealed to us, at least in their current pre-alpha state, are at the moment. So at BlizzCon, they showed us some bits and pieces of 2 of the Druid trees, Keeper of the Grove and Elun's Chosen. Keeper of the Grove is available to balance and restoration, and this focuses on treants through things like Force of Nature and Grove Guardians. It seems to mostly be giving extra buffs or extra benefits while your treants are active, and having a few things that tie into what your treants are doing while they're around. Elun's Chosen can be used by Balance and Guardian, and this focuses on more arcane abilities, the sort of moon-themed abilities like Moonfire, Fury of Elune, Lunar Beam. Now, we didn't get to see the complete trees for these at BlizzCon. They just kind of showed a few of the talents that were probably the ones that were just the most furthest along in development at the time. But what is interesting about these is that they do both require some very specific and relatively deep talent choices. If you're a Restoration Druid and you take Keeper of the Grove, but you don't take Grove Guardians in your Restoration talent tree, you're getting almost nothing out of the Keeper of the Grove tree. Similarly, if you're a Guardian Druid and you take Elun's Chosen, but then you don't take Lunar Beam, again, you're missing out on a huge portion of the advantages that that tree would bestow to you. And I'm undecided as of yet how I feel about that in total. On the one hand, it does feel a little bit awkward to say you're just literally not getting any, like if you want to take this tree, you have to take this talent point. without directly forcing it and allowing players to make that sort of incorrect choice. But on the other hand, I think if they limit themselves to only things that have no impact on the talent trees whatsoever, that removes a lot of their ability to be creative with what they're coming up with for these hero talents. So I'm still a bit undecided. I think I won't really know how I feel about that until we can actually get in and play with it once the War Within Alpha and Beta start. Moving on through a few more examples, Death Knight has the Sand Lane tree. I did briefly mention this one earlier. This one's for Blood and Unholy, and it has a lot of vampiric flavor, takes a lot of inspiration from things like Blood Queen Lanathel from Icecrown Citadel. Just very much if you want to be a vampire Death Knight, this is the tree for you. They showed off an evoker tree called Chrono Warden. This is for preservation and augmentation. Now, I don't know a ton about evokers because I haven't really played one at all, but it seems like it just brings in a lot of bronze dragonflight sort of inspiration. Gives a lot of, temporal, timey-wimey, that sort of thing added into those trees. The warrior tree they've showed off, I actually find super interesting just from a philosophical angle and from how they've come together with it. It's called the Mountain Thane. This is very, very thunder and lightning focused. Like reading through the tooltips on this, I get a very heavy like Thor feeling from this. Like you have a bunch of abilities that will call down lightning bolts, and those lightning bolts can have extra effects on top of them. There's a lot of thunder stuff tied into this as well. It really feels very much like trying to make your warrior into Thor. And this is another one that does have some very specific requirements in the talent build. It does require more or less Avatar and Thunderclap. And it won't actually force you to pick those, but if you don't pick them, you're missing out on a lot of the perks of the tree, which again, I find interesting. And then there's the Paladin tree they showed off. Remember earlier when we were talking about philosophy and the whole what you are but more thing and how they're not trying to make things too complicated? The Lightsmith tree seems to be the complete opposite of that. So this tree is accessible to protection and holy, and it centers a lot about creating these holy armaments that you or your allies can pick up and use. In fact, looking through the tree, it seems to actually add 2 active abilities. One is to summon the holy armaments, and the other is whatever rite you select, which are weapon imbues. And not only are we adding these 2 abilities, but one of them requires other players to interact with in some way or another. And even if it's just a matter of them running over top of it, like, does anyone else remember Mistweaver orbs way back in the day where you had to drop them like directly on top of people, or you would put some around and hope that your teammates ran into them? It just kind of feels like a mess. And the whole tree just seems to really be trying to create a new combat loop instead of enhancing what you do already. It's not what you are, but more. This is literally them adding on new things for you to keep track of. If you remember that quote from earlier, this seems to not only add a whole lot of cognitive load for the people playing the Lightsmith, but it's actually adding more stuff for people outside of that class to do as well by having to interact with these holy armaments. It just kind of seems to go directly against a lot of the stated philosophies. And it's entirely possible they've done this intentionally, right? Like it's super possible they put this out there as a preview to be like, let's see how people react to this and see if this is something that people want. In which case, if a bunch of people go, damn, Lightsmith seems way cooler than the other ones, I want to be a Lightsmith, all the rest of these seem bland, then they would be able to adjust their philosophies at this early pre-alpha stage and be able to adapt that to what the feedback they're getting initially actually is. But at least based on what I've seen so far and from talking to a couple of people who play Paladins, I don't think that's the reaction we're getting so far. I think people are looking at Lightsmith and going, that just seems like a whole lot of extra work that's just going to be annoying to deal with. At least that was my reaction, and the reaction of a couple of, like I said, longtime Paladins that I've talked to about it. So I don't know. We'll see. I expect no matter what, there's going to be a lot of iteration throughout the alpha and beta period of the War Within. I kind of hope they decide to go a different direction for this. Overall, though, I really like the hero talent system, and I think there's a lot of really good things they can do with it. In fact, thinking long term, I can really see how this system can solve a lot of the long-term problems that WoW tends to have. Like thinking to future expansions or even future content patches, this is a good way to solve the borrowed power problem by adding a new hero talent tree that you can then choose to engage with, and you can play with this hero talent tree. But if you decide you don't want it, you can go back to one of the other hero talent trees. You can swap in one of those instead. Like imagine if Legion artifacts or half the systems in BFA had been implemented as hero talent trees that we could theoretically then still have accessible today. It's also just a good way to continue to add new talents into the game and new choices for players to make without ending up with 200-point talent trees. Now, the one wrinkle that I've sort of been mulling over with this whole thing as I think about this system and how it can apply to the future is the whole 2 options per spec thing. And the more I think about it, the more I don't necessarily think every new hero tree that gets added in the future needs to be accessible to multiple specs. I think that's just going to end up creating a ton of work. Like, they've clearly already put a ton of thought into the 39 hero talents that they're rolling out now and how those can overlap between different specs. I think it's fine if in the future they were to say, okay, and fire mages, this is your new hero talent tree that you now can choose in addition to these other 2 that already exist. What I hope they don't do is continue to add more talent points into the hero talent trees in the future. I think this little pocket of 11 talents that they've got is a really good fit for this style of system, and it makes it feel like its own little thing without overriding your class and spec choice. So I think I would rather see in the distant future, in expansions like Midnight, Last Titan, etc., I think I would rather see more hero talent tree options, and you can choose between more different specs for your hero talents than having more talents inside those options. And it's super possible that we still eventually reach a point where things just get way too complicated and there's just too much complexity being added in. Like, if we eventually reach a point where it's like, hey, I'm a I don't know, restoration shaman, and these are my 12 different options for my hero talents. It's possible that gets to a point where it's a little bit too out of hand. But considering how far into the distant future things would have to be before we actually reach that state, I would guess it's entirely possible that they just want to do another entire talent tree revamp by then anyway. But overall, I'm very hopeful for this system, and I think there's a lot of really cool stuff they can do with it. I just think it's probably going to need a lot of iteration, and I'm sure Blizzard believes this as well, that it's going to need a lot of iteration over the course of the War Within Alpha and Beta. Anyway, we're going to wrap up that topic for today. I do have a couple questions I want to get to, though. First one came from Radigar TV, who said, how difficult has been slipping back into creating content like this, or did it just feel natural to come back to doing something like this? And I thought this question was fun because it's more about the process of creating these than it is about the actual content we've been discussing. And the reality is also, I just kind of fell right back into it. Like, my process isn't exactly the same as it used to be. There's a couple things that I'm doing slightly differently even still, but it turns out talking at a camera about some topic or other is something that I guess it's just like built into my brain or something. I don't know. I just kind of fell right back into it, and here we are. The other similar question that I wanted to get to, which came from a lot of different people, so I don't have a specific one to show on the screen or anything, but a lot of people have been asking, what about bringing back TankSpot? And specifically asking, what about bringing back encounter guides? And I am happy to say that that is absolutely 100% the intention. We will most likely start with the next phase of Season of Discovery once the Gnomrigan raid comes out. I mean, if you guys really want to see a BFD guide at this point, more than happy to make one of those as well. It'd probably be a short video because most of the encounters in there are pretty easy. In fact, I kind of gave one of these in a previous Sounds Good Makes Sense, almost call it the Weekly Marmot. Kind of gave a rundown of most of the fights in there in a previous Sounds Good Makes Sense. So probably with the next Season of Discovery phase, when we're doing Gnomrigan, my plan will be to put out just sort of a all-encompassing, let's go through the different fights in Gnomrigan sort of video. I'm probably not going to worry about encounter guides for anything in Dragonflight, but once the War Within comes out, I'm planning to get very heavily back into retail as well. I'll get back into Dragonflight at some point too, but the War Within is really where I want to start going with retail again. And at that point, we'll see what happens. I could see dungeon guides being made for like Mythic Plus for that sort of thing. I could see, there's a lot of things that I could see occurring over there. I may even get back into full-time raiding. Who knows? I mean, I'm more or less a full-time content creator again at this point, so I guess I've got time for it. Anyway, we're going to wrap up there. Thank you all so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to have you here. Those are just some of the ideas, by the way, that I've got for future content. I'm actually planning to put out a video at the start of the new year that'll probably be separate to Sounds Good Makes Sense. That's going to go into more details about what my plans are, where I'm going with content creation, and different ideas for different styles of content that could come out here on this channel. So keep an eye out for that in the future, depending on where things shake out. In the meantime, you can follow me on pretty much every social media site. My name is Devolore, basically everywhere, Devolore. It's really, really simple. Also, you can catch my Twitch streams, which I have also been streaming here on YouTube as well. And let me know what you think of that. I genuinely don't know how YouTube streaming, I don't know that much about it at this point. It's not something that I've ever really looked into too much. So I've just sort of been poking at it here and there and seeing what the results is. So I want to know what you guys think. Please continue to leave your comments. Please continue to like and subscribe as much as you can. And just let me know your thoughts. I want to hear them. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks again so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.